Simply put, fasting means restricted consumption of food. Okay, so either you stop eating completely or almost completely for a certain stretch of time. So a fast can be either a timed fast or a meal-based fast. A timed fast is just as what the term means. It just means that you are eating 1 or 2 meals or certain meals at very specific times. So let's say if you have a habit of eating lunch at 11 a.m. and you have supper at 6 p.m. daily, that would be a timed fast. That is, that between the time that you're eating, all right, so the break that you're giving, those are all the fasting periods. So that's why it's called a timed fast. On the other hand, a meal-based fast is restricting the number of meals. So let's say you choose to have either 1 meal in a day, or 2 meals in a day, or 3 meals in a day. Then the gap that you're leaving between meals, okay, that would be your meal-based fast. So meal-based fast actually takes into account even the time factor as well in most of the cases. All right. Fasting can be either short-term or it could be long-term fast. Short-term fast usually happens for a few hours. It could be combining like 2-3 days, or it could be a weekly fast. Whereas prolonged fast is what you see in all our cultures, where we have the prolonged fast would be sometime somewhere around 21 days or few months of fasting. Now, fasting can also be a calorically restricted fast. It could be a nutrient restricted fast, or it could be both. Caloric restriction is where you just try to stay away from certain amount of calories. So let's say you cut down the number of calories per day by restricting the number of meals you eat. That would be a caloric restriction. Now it's interesting when we take the statistics of calories in the USA, the average, I'm talking about the average calories, is about 3,800 calories per day. That's the amount of calories that a person takes. Okay, it's an average count. Germany, I brought in Germany because Sastry is from Germany. So Germany is about 3,500. Canada, we have a few friends in Canada, that's 3,500. India, again, this is an average caloric intake. India is about 2,500 calories. Okay, so now if this is your average, and if you restrict your calorie intake by half, or by 40% or by 60%, that would be caloric restriction. All right, and then nutrient restriction is where you avoid certain nutrients. So these are the typical what you hear in the media. The protein fast, where you totally avoid protein, or carb fast, where you totally avoid carb, or it could be a lipid fat-based fast, or it could be a juice fast, or it could be a fruit fast. All right, so all these are all where you're restricting certain amount of nutrients. All right, and then what we also have seasonal fasting. Seasonal fasting is where seasonal fasting is where you strictly eat any food that is within the season. All right, so which means that you have to be very careful of what's available during that season per se. So now what's happened is, because of globalization and because of the way we are producing our food, you can see food in your market throughout the year. For example, the other day last year when I was in India, we had strawberries and avocados, and we had blueberries, and we had grapes throughout that period of month when it was not supposed to be there. All right. So seasonal fasting, in order to have seasonal fasting, you need to look back at your primordial or primal times and examine what was the food supply back then. You don't have to go that far. You can even go back to your grandfather, grandmother, that stage of a life, and see what they were eating, because they were all eating with season. Okay. And today, as we speak, the best way to follow a seasonal fast is to go to the local farmers market, because farmers market generally will keep only those things that they grow for that season. All right. So which means that, seasonal fasting would be something like when you consume, during winter time, fats and tubers, when you consume fruits and vegetables during summer, and so on. So that's a seasonal fast only. All right. Now, when we talk about, and then, then the question comes, what is intermittent fasting? That's a term that we use these days. Intermittent fasting covers everything that I just spoke earlier. Okay, it means you're restricting your food intake. It could be a meal-based fast. It could be a time-based fast. It could be alternate day, which means that you're eating one day and then the next day you're totally coming out of food. You're not eating at all. You're only drinking water. Okay, and we have people in the Bay Area that do that. And then you also have, as part of intermittent fasting, you have 5x2 fasting. 5x2 is where you eat for 5 days a week, and then 2 days you completely fast, having only water. Okay, so and then you have the other thing would be a daily time restricted fasting. Time restricted fasting is where you eat a normal non-restrictive diet, but it's just one meal a day. Okay, so you're not cutting on calories, you're not cutting on nutrients, you're not doing anything else with the diet. You're eating a wholesome diet, okay, whatever you think is good for you, but you're eating only one meal a day. That's a daily time restricted intermittent fasting. Now, evidence-based studies have shown that all these fasting paradigms, no doubt, are good, they're safe, but they're good only for certain people. They're not good for everybody. So if you see a neighbor doing a juice fast, if you see a neighbor doing a carb fast, or if you see your neighbor doing something else, please don't. And if you see their remarkable changes in their body, please don't go by their changes, okay? Because what is good for one is not good for everybody else. So you need to see what impact food has on your own physiology and adopt that kind of a fasting paradigm, if at all you're interested in fasting paradigm. Now, the whole concept of fasting has become so important that now there's a branch of nutrition called ChronoNutrition. Okay, ChronoNutrition is the study of how food and nutrition affects your physiology in terms of the time of the day. Okay, we don't understand this, but now it's very, very important. Both Ayurveda and yoga talked about that in a great, great fashion. Okay, that is how time-based fast or how time-based eating affects all the physiology. Now, when we talk about nutrition, when we talk about diet, please remember there are genes within ourselves. Okay, there are genes called the clock genes. So just as a watch or a clock tells you the time of the day, in the same way, these clock genes in our body regulate every aspect of what we do. So whether we feel hungry, whether we feel full, so satiety or appetite, or whether we need to go to sleep, or whether our muscles are active during the day for certain kind of a sport, all these are regulated by clock genes. It's the clock genes that tell you when to eat and when you feel hungry, when to sleep and all that. It's just that we don't understand those clock genes. We don't listen to them. All right. And these clock genes, they are in tune with the environment. Okay. They are in tune with the age of the person, the time, the season, the climate, and travel and sleep as well. That's the reason why all these can have a profound effect on our health and wellness. Okay, and so ChronoNutrition actually helps, is very important because it tells you maximum brain development for memory, for muscle growth, for sports, for performance, for bringing down inflammation, for avoiding cancers. All these can be done if you follow the clock genes or the time factor very close to your dietary habits. All right. So here I'd like to bring in the concept of another term called metabolic flex fasting. This is what we have used in our paradigm, that is at Apollo Health, where I work for Alzheimer's disease. But of course, we have seen that this has a profound effect on even normal individuals as well. So we call that a metabolic flex fasting. All right. So metabolic flex fasting is a gentle fasting process that encompasses all aspects of fasting and more. It can be experienced, it can be used by anybody in order to experience optimal immunity. If you follow metabolic flex fasting, you are allowing yourself to overcome any kind of travel issues, sleep issues, brain fog, mental stress, physical stress, weight issues. A lot of people are concerned about weight, all right, or work-related stress issues. All these can be avoided if you adopt this metabolic flex fasting. It's one of the best ways to experience optimal health and wellness. Okay, and if you're performing or if you are into metabolic flex fasting, which I'm going to talk about in greater detail, you don't have to worry about all the other paradigms that are out there. You don't have to worry about what everybody else is doing. Okay, because metabolic flex, based on our studies, it can be used or it can be embraced by anybody, whether you are healthy or whether you have a disease condition. Anybody can use it. Okay, now just check the cartoon here and see if it makes sense, and try to see what exactly is the bottom line message from this cartoon here, because we are going to dissect each aspect of this cartoon and we're going to talk about greater detail. Okay, so what you'll notice at the outset is the importance of time when it comes to eating. Okay, and this is very important because the timing of your meals is based on the sun's position. Okay, so if you eat with the sun's position in mind, then you are avoiding all kinds of health issues, weight issues, inflammatory conditions, cancers, everything, in order to ensure harmony. Okay, so this time-based fasting that I'm talking about becomes a very powerful, it's a very gentle one, but it's a very powerful way of fasting. Okay, so look at this cartoon here and let's look at each aspect of this cartoon in greater detail. So here in this cartoon, you can notice that what I'm trying to tell you is that because we need to respect the clock genes that are in our body, the clock genes regulate every activity, my friends. It regulates our digestive process, it regulates our eating process, and it regulates our appetite as well. The clock genes are closely in sync with the sunrise, with the sunset, with the day, with the night, with the cold, the hot, the windy climate, humid temperatures, everything. So at noon, when the sun is at its peak, these clock genes become active, and then they send the information to the brain, which then sends the signals to the stomach saying, I feel hungry. And that's one of the reasons, my friends, that throughout the world, wherever you go, whichever part of the world you are in, between 11 and 1, people will tend to have lunch. Okay, and even though we think of it as a habit, okay, it's come with evolution. The clock genes for appetite has a close association with the sun at its peak. And that's the reason why you tend to have a big lunch between 11 and 1. Now, interestingly, those same clock genes, so what happens is they rise, they peak at around 12 when the sun is at its peak, and then they ebb. All right. So this rising corresponds to somewhere around 8 and 9 in the morning. And the ebb that comes that you see is around 6 or 7 in the evening. Okay. The peak is around 11 or 12. So that's the reason why both in Ayurveda and yoga, and of course now evidence-based studies suggest that you need to have a small meal in the morning around 8 or 9, and you have a small meal in the night when the sun is setting. Okay, but you have a big meal around the time when the sun is at its peak. And now we know that this is because the clock genes are in that biphasic response. Okay, so and then what we have seen is chrononutritionists have noticed that even our digestive capacity, even though we don't understand, even though we are not in tune with our own bodies, the digestive capacity for every individual is low during the early hours in the morning and in the evening. But the same digestive capacity is at its peak in the afternoon. And so that's the reason why both chrononutrition and Vedic sciences tell you to have a big meal when the sun is at its peak and small meals in the morning or evening. All right. And now we have seen both in our work at Apollo Health, where I work, and of course, other evidence-based studies from other labs have shown very clearly that those who eat their big meal between 11 and 1 p.m., they tend to suffer less from metabolic disturbances. They tend to lose their weight easily. They are very stable, both physically and mentally, and they are very less prone to emotional disturbances. So I hope this figure is clear when it comes to eating your lunch. All right. Now, when it comes to the morning break, all right. So remember, when we talk about break fast, it means that you're breaking a fast. What fast are we talking about? We're talking about the night fast that we're breaking. So generally what happens is we tend not to eat in the night, and then we sleep, and then we then in the morning we break our fast. Okay, a gentle fast is highly appropriate to improve your immunity, to make you more stable, to have a good sleep, okay, and to be more stable physically and mentally. Now, modern research studies agrees with Vedic studies that show that if you have a fasting window of 12 to 15 hours between your previous night meal and the next day morning breakfast, a 12 to 15 hour gap, okay, if you have that gap, That 12 to 15 hour break gap is extremely important for a lot of physiological processes that happen in the body and the brain. And we call this period of fasting the ketosis period. And I'm sure all of you can recall back our biochemistry when we were doing our masters in Baroda and Ahmedabad. Ketosis was a term that we didn't attribute that to nutrition. But now we know what happens is during ketosis, which is a 12 to 15 hour break, where you're not eating anything between your last meal the previous night and the next day meal in the breakfast, because you're not eating any calories, the body and the brain, they tend to switch from carbohydrates to fat as a metabolic source of energy. And when they switch from carbs to metabolic to fats, what happens is fats get broken down. There are three products. Try to recall your back. There are three products we call as ketone bodies, okay? And one of them is beta hydroxybutyric acid. Now we know from our studies in the lab and from other people that beta hydroxybutyric acid is extremely important for liver function, for lung function, for kidney function, for normal blood flow to the brain, and for brain function as well. Now, along with the beta hydroxybutyric acid during the 12 to 15 hour fast, what happens is your brain is releasing another neurohormone called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. Okay, don't worry about those terms, but just remember that during this fast period, that's what happens. You have ketone body, beta hydroxybutyric acid, and then you have a neurochemical called BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. Together, they do a lot of benefits for the brain and the body. So one of the things that happens during this fasting period, okay, during this 12 to 15 hour fast is we have what we call an internal recycling machinery. Just like the person comes to pick up your trash once a week or twice in a week, in the same way in our body, we need to get rid of cellular trash. We accumulate a lot of cellular debris and cellular trash on a given daily basis, and we need to get rid of them. Okay, accumulation of that cellular trash is what we call plaques and all the other terms that we use. And this removal of cellular trash happens only when you give the body and the brain the 12 to 15 hour of gap where you're fasting. Okay, now what is very interesting is so now what happens is if you eat in between, let's say you get up in the middle of the night and you tend to go to the fridge and grab something to eat, or if you don't keep a 12 to 15 hour gap, all these physiological processes will not take place. So they kick in only when you keep that window of 12 to 15 hours. Now, interestingly, beta hydroxybutyric acid and BDNF gets released when you also do heavy physical exercise, when you go for a walk, when you go for a swim, when you play a sport. It also happens when you are engaged in some mental training exercise. Okay, so let's say you're meditating, or you're focused on a given task where you're doing a lot of analysis. Okay, let's say it's an art or a painting or a sculpture, pottery, carpentry, where your entire zone is on that activity and you're totally involved in that and you're using your brain. During all those periods, your brain is releasing BDNF and beta hydroxybutyric acid. Okay, so now here is a beautiful example. Let's say you have a 12-hour fast. So let's say you ate in the night at around 7 or 8 in the night. And then you give a 12-hour gap in the morning. And then before eating breakfast, let's say you engaged in a mild physical exercise, say yoga or some stretches. And then you engage, before going to the physical exercise, you engaged yourself in a mental training exercise. Let's say you analyze some data for people who are data analysts. Or let's say if you're into spiritual world, let's say you analyze the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, which are very complex texts. This is engaging your brain. And then you followed it up with physical exercise. What's happening is now you are building up a huge reservoir of BDNF and beta hydroxybutyric acid in your body. And that you need to do it on a daily basis, my friends, in order for you to have an optimal health and wellness. Okay, so basically what you're doing is the only way you can get a 12 to 15 hour gap between two meals is having your dinner around 6:30 or 7. Okay, and then you're not eating anything till the next day morning till around 8 a.m. So you're giving a 12-hour window. Okay. When I say 12-hour window fast, you can definitely take water. You can take some herbal tea, but try not to put any sugars. Try not to add any calories to your diet. All right. Now, this doesn't apply to people with who have issues of diabetes, but even for diabetic people in our Apollo Health, we have shown that even people with diabetes, even though they say we feel hungry and all that, the reason why we call it metabolic flex is because your body can adapt to this. So even if you're diabetic, you can still do this and get away by not eating during this 12 to 15-hour break time. Okay, so now you can understand why in our Vedic system, in the Gurukula days, what they did is they ate very early, around 5:30 or 6 in the evening, and then they spend their time reading the scripture, and then next day morning, around the Brahma Muhurta time, around 4 in the morning, they got up, they did their mental training exercises, they tried to memorize the text, or the teacher would teach all the complex Upanishad texts and all that, and then they would engage in pranayama and dhyana, dharana, and yoga asana practices and all that. So they combined all these aspects. Now, they didn't talk about ketosis, they didn't talk about beta hydroxybutyric acid, they didn't talk about BDNF, but they knew that a combination of the fast with a mental training exercise and a physical exercise will allow you to become very, very resilient. All right. Now, metabolic flex also requires you to have a proper snacking time as well. You can't just grab and keep eating whenever you feel like. Okay, please remember, when we say meals, when I'm talking about meals, I'm not talking about meals as lunch or dinner. I'm talking about eating events. Okay, both Ayurveda and yoga and now evidence-based studies suggest that between two eating events, you have to keep a 3-hour gap. Why? Because when you eat something, even if you drink, let's say, a cup of coffee or tea that has milk and sugar in it, okay, for that thing to get digested and to enter the lower intestine and the colon, it takes about 3 hours. Okay, so which means that even before your first meal enters the stomach or enters the intestine, if you grab something else, then what happens is you are creating a state of ups and downs of the insulin metabolism. So because each time you eat, what's happening? Your insulin is being released. You don't want to have too many insulin fluxes. You need to have insulin going up, and then the insulin has to come down. Once it comes down, that's the signal that you can have your second eating event. Okay, so that's usually about 3 to 4 hours. So you have to be insulin sensitive. You should not be insulin resistant. And the way you can be insulin sensitive is preventing yourself from keep on repeatedly eating, because that's going to cause numerous insulin spikes. And too many insulin spikes, my friends, may not be in the younger age, but as you grow older, it can cause a lot of digestive disturbances. So now the question is when to snack now. So let's say now you have decided to give yourself a 12-hour gap between night and next day morning breakfast. Okay, which means then you're left with another 12 hours. And in the other 12 hours, let's say you're giving a gap, you want to keep a gap of 4 hours between meals. Okay, which means then you're going to end up having only 3 meals. Okay, so you can have a breakfast in the morning. Okay, which means then if you're going to have breakfast around 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, then you cannot have another eating session because it's time for lunch after 3 hours. And if you're going to have lunch at 12, then the next eating session would be around 3 o'clock. That will be your snack. Okay, and then another 3 hours later, you're going to have your supper. Okay, followed by a 12-hour fast, which means in your life, if you're going to follow a metabolic flex diet, okay, where you are going to indulge in fasting process as well, then you cannot have more than 3 meals and a snack. Okay, if you're going to keep the 3-hour gap, 3 to 4 hours of gap. And of course, I'm not saying that you need to do that, but if you're going to be eating intermittently, then of course this whole thing breaks apart. But if you're going to keep the 3-hour or 4-hour gap, then you'll end up having just 3 meals. Okay, a morning meal, a lunch meal, and then a dinner meal, and then with a snack in between. Okay, that, my friends, if you do it on a daily basis, this is where you will not have any metabolic disturbances, you will not have any digestive disturbances, you will not have any other issues with the body and the brain. Okay, so which means that Let's say you decide to have your last meal of the day at 7 in the night. Okay, which means that next day morning after 8 o'clock is when you're going to break your fast. So if you're going to break your fast at 8, then you can safely have your lunch around 12. You can safely have a snack at around 3, and you can safely have your meal at around 7, your last meal. Okay, so you can see this cartoon here that I'm projecting. Okay, this is a great example of maintaining the metabolic flex diet. All right, now when it comes to dinner, the last part, I know a lot of people tend to have the dinner around 9:30 or 10 in the night. Please remember, if you're going to have your dinner around 9:30 or 10, then you need to keep a 3. So between dinner and sleep, you need to keep a 3-hour gap. You don't want to go to sleep on a heavy stomach. First of all, your dinner should be light. It should be very light because there's no activity happening after dinner. Okay, and then after dinner, you're going to give a 3-hour gap for the food to enter the intestine before you go to bed. Please remember, one of the main aspects of the sleeping phenomenon is the release of melatonin, and melatonin will not get released until the food enters the lower intestine. That's when the clock gene for sleeping tells you to go to sleep. Now, so what happens is, now if you delay your dinner time, you're going to delay your sleep time. If you're going to delay your dinner time, you're going to delay your breakfast time as well, if you're going to keep a 12-hour gap. Okay, so if you decide to eat after 9 or 10, then please be mindful of your sleep habit. And then my suggestion would be, don't even have breakfast then. Straight away go for lunch, because there's no gap. If you want to leave a 12-hour gap, then there's no point in having breakfast and immediately after that follow it with lunch. You cannot have that. All right, so now there's a substantial evidence, research studies from our lab and from others that have shown that people who maintain a 3-hour gap between dinner and sleep, okay, will experience optimal good quality sleep and optimal health as well. Okay, so if you want to sleep immediately after dinner, okay, I mean, if you want to sleep early, okay, make sure that you have your dinner early as well. Okay, so here's a summary slide. Okay, just see it and let me know if you have any questions after when I open up for Q&A. So basically, if you're following a 12/3 metabolic flex diet, it's a very, very powerful fasting paradigm. It takes into account every aspect of fasting that you see out there in the media circles. Okay, it's a gentle way. It's a time-based fasting. If you do it correctly, it takes into account only 3 to 4 meals in a day, which is absolutely perfect. Okay, which is what we want. So it includes a 12-hour minimal fast. Okay, and it's also called, the metabolic flex diet is also called the 12/3 metabolic flex diet. If you go and Google it and see 12/3, the 12 indicates the 12-hour fasting period. The 3 there indicates two things. It indicates the time between your dinner and sleep, and it indicates the time that you're living between 2 eating events. Okay, very, very important. So the next time somebody tells you I'm doing a juice fast, or I'm doing a carb fast, or a protein fast, you tell them that you're doing a 12/3 fast. Okay, it's a very cool way of fasting, believe me. Now, will fasting have a deleterious effect? It does, if you follow it incorrectly. Okay, so there are people that I know who do prolonged starvation, or who severely cut back on calories. These are all extreme cases of ketosis, and you don't want that because it can be very deleterious to the health. Okay, now you hear from all kinds of, whether it's WhatsApp or other media outlets, you'll see people talking about different aspects of fasting. Please don't jump onto those fad diets. We have here in the Bay Area, we have the CEOs of all the major tech companies that meet one day in a week. On a Wednesday, they meet in San Francisco. They have a place where they meet, and then they'll eat the whole day. That's their job, eat the whole day. And then they fast, total fast, the next 6 days. Okay, you don't want to do that, my friends. Just because a CEO of tech has done it doesn't mean that it's good for you. Okay, so that's one aspect. It can have an impact, negative impact on your health. The second thing is now there are a lot of supplement industries that are coming up with fasting mimetics. These are pills which they tell you to take, and then they'll say, don't worry about fasting. Eat, binge eat throughout the day, snack throughout the day, eat whatever you want to eat, but take 3 times a day, take these pills, because these pills will mimic the fasting process. And what are these pills? These pills are nothing but they are loads and loads of beta hydroxybutyric acid and BDNF. And you know, in the physiology, body physiology, if you take anything in excess, that can be deleterious to the health. So please don't think about fasting mimetics. Just do the natural way of fasting. All right. Because we have seen, in fact, I have seen, as an Ayurvedic doctor, I've also seen as a scientist in Apollo Health, people coming to us with all kinds of mental fog and fatigue, weight gain issues, weakness, inability to work for long hours, sleep issues, and all that. And when I question them, I get to know that they are either doing severe fasting or they're doing fasting mimetics. Okay, so please use your own judgment. If at all you want to use a fasting paradigm in your life, my suggestion is to use a 12-3 fasting diet, because that's really very beneficial for everybody. Okay, so now towards the end of my talk here, how exactly does this work with Ekadashi fasting? Now, our ancestors didn't talk about clock genes, they didn't talk about ChronoNutrition, they didn't talk about ketosis, but they emphasized a beautiful fasting method that took into account the sun, the moon, and the earth. And they provided that in terms of the lunar fasting called Ekadashi fasting. Okay, so think about Ekadashi fasting. The moon, as we know, is the satellite of the earth, right? The earth revolves and rotates around its axis, okay, around the sun. Okay, so now what happens is twice in a month, if you take the lunar calendar, twice in a month, the sun, the earth, and the moon, they come into an alignment called the trine. Okay, this trine is nothing but it changes the amount of sunlight that reflects off of the moon as we see from the earth. Okay, and because we are seeing it from on the earth, the reflection of the sunlight on the moon. Okay, what happens is twice in a month it changes the way the moon's appearance comes to us. So either it comes to us as a new moon or a dark moon called Amavasya, or it could be a full moon or what we call Purnima. So this happens twice in a month. Okay, so it happens twice in a month. We know Ekadashi as the 11th day. Okay, so we have Ekadashi followed by Dvadasi, Trayodashi, Chaturdashi, and then you have either Amavasya, the beginning of the month, which is the Krishna Paksha, or you have Purnima, which is the Shukla Paksha, the waxing moon. All right, so twice in a month, the Ekadashi period is what the astrologers call as the trine. Okay, and this is the amount of sunlight reflecting off the moon. So what happens? Why is it so important? Well, for people who are in the beach, in the coastal areas, the next time you are there, just go and see what happens on Ekadashi day, followed by those 4 days. The gravitational effect of the moon on the earth is extremely strong, very strong. And I remember as a child when I used to go to the Bhavnagar coast, I was born and raised in Gujarat in Bhavnagar coast, and the waves used to be huge, tremendous, not like the tsunami, but similar to that. And we were always advised not to go to the beach around that time. Okay, and I've been to the San Francisco beach as well, and I've seen it. It's not as impactful as what I saw in Bhavnagar, but it's still there. The waves are tremendous. Okay, so which means that during this time, the moon's effect on the fluidy, watery earth is very, very strong. Now look back at your own body. The fluidy, earthy element, which is the water element, which is we are made of 70 to 75% of water. All the fluids in our body is nothing but the water element, which means that during these 2 days, Ekadashi day, the moon has a tremendous impact on our digestive system. Okay, how does it show up? Not many have seen this, but when I was doing my Ayurvedic practice, me and all my fellow mates, and we observed on our own cells for almost 6 months. What we have noticed is during this period of Ekadashi, followed by the 4 days before Amavasya or Purnima, the digestion is very, very sluggish for everybody. whatever be your constitution, digestion is sluggish. Now, we don't realize it because we are so much drowned in our sensory potentials, in our sensory voices, that we don't listen to it. But if we carefully look back, if we are in tune, if you have constant meditation practice, and if you're constantly in tune with your body, you will realize that on these days, the digestion is very, very sluggish. So imagine now if you're eating like any other business on any other day, or if you're eating much more heavily than any other day on these 4 days. Okay, it's going to impact your digestion. That's the reason why our forefathers, our ancestors, they talked about, fasting on this day. Okay, either you fast for 1 meal a day on Ekadashi day, either 1 meal a day, or have a very light diet throughout the day. Okay, why? To maintain a natural flow of the fluids in our body, and to have a good health and physical mind. I mean, physical body and a good mind. Okay, so by creating a fasting period, our ancestors actually created a system by which we could go easy on our own diet, our own gut metabolism, our own gut environment, and to create a natural ketosis state. Okay, so which means every 2 weeks, you don't even have to follow the metabolic flex diet that I told you. If you're going to follow the Ekadashi fast, then every 2 weeks, okay, start by restricting your diet on Ekadashi day and follow it up for fasting lightly or eating lightly on the next 4 days before Amavasya and before Purnima. You are ensuring a restrictive fast on a given monthly basis. Okay, and then I would suggest that you if you're doing a combined whatever fasting, you combine that with some kind of physical exercise, combine it with some kind of mental exercise. And I tell you, my friends, you will have a very, very resilient brain. You'll have a perfect body. You will have a perfect immunity. Right? So let me conclude here, and then I'll take your questions. Fasting is restrictive eating. A gentle but powerful fasting is 12/3, flex fasting. If you're accustomed to eating 2 meals, try to more than 2 meals, try to leave a 3 to 4 hour gap between 2 meals or between 2 eating events. Leave a 3-hour gap between your sleep and between your dinner and sleep time. Okay, try not to eat anything after your dinner. Why? Because you want to keep a 12-hour fast between your dinner and the next day morning breakfast. Okay, you can either have a 12/3 fast, a 13/3 fast, 14/3 fast, or 15/3 fast. The top numerator indicates the amount of fasting time you're giving between your last meal and the next day morning. I try to have a 14 to 15 hour of a fasting period. Okay, so this concept is very important because it helps you to have. I mean, for people who are having issues with weight, this is the best method. Okay, all right. So let me stop the share here. And if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, if you have any diet, if you have doubts, additions, whatever, let me know. And let me stop the recording here.